Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Find a living in fisheries. The UAS Fisheries Technology Program offers online study from anywhere in Alaska, plus labs and workshops in many Alaska towns.
Is most likely a chum.
Find your living without leaving where you are. Fisheries Technology from UAS.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, you can call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also go to our website at weather.gov/Alaska, and you can follow us on Twitter or on Facebook. Starting off for today, we'll do the quick reminder of the show times as they are changing around the state for APB, ARCS, KUAC, all going to be at 5:30 as usual, but for 360 North, 7:30 p.m. And then for Alaska Public Media, we are looking at 5 a.m. on the following morning. For our advisories that we have out for the state, all are high surf advisories and all are around either the Kotzebue Sound area or the Norton Sound area. For the Norton Sound area, we do have them along the northern coast and the eastern coast, and then for the Kotzebue Sound area, all the western parts of the Kotzebue Sound. Those are all in effect until 4 a.m. tomorrow morning on Thursday. For our satellite imagery, we can take a quick look at what's kind of bringing up those high surf advisories. If we watch, we have the system here that's pushing into the state, but behind that we have a long fetch of west to southwest winds, and that's helping to bring up a lot of waves up into this area and up through the Bering Strait as well. We watch this again and we'll take a look now as it's impacting the rest of the state. We have that system this morning that was pushing further to the east, and that did actually bring some snow out to western portions of the interior and the Brooks Range, starting to make the mushers happy out there. And as that's pushing further to the east, we are seeing it be a little bit warmer, so that snow is mixing with some rain, and primarily rain in the lower lying areas of the interior and on the Arctic coast as it passes. As we watch again, we can look way out to the west, and we have another system coming up that's pushing in out over the western Aleutian Islands, and then even the beginnings of a third system pushing up from the North Pacific. One more time we'll look out, and we'll start in the southeastern part of the state here. In the southeastern Gulf, we do have one weakening low down to the south of the Panhandle, bringing in some cloud cover, but most of the rain staying further to the south. So as we look at our weather for the remainder of the day, we do have some cloud cover lingering over the area, but that low is remaining further to the south, and it's actually pushing off to the south and east. We do have our ridging pushing in out over the southeastern part of the state, starting to clear out some of the skies, especially over the more northern locations of the Panhandle, but that ridging is expected to build in further as we move out through time. The main part of that high is here south of the Alaska Peninsula, but as we look further to the north, that trough pushing through the state, expecting to bring more rain throughout much of the interior up towards the Arctic coastline, and as we get into higher elevations like the Brooks Range, going to see some snow with that as it passes. Behind that trough, some lingering showers throughout areas of the Brooks Range down through the western parts of the interior to eastern parts of the Norton and Kotzebue Sounds. As we go down even further to the south, we do have some isolated showers out over the Alaska Range. Going to see some snow mixing with that in those higher elevations, and then parts of the Bristol Bay area, some isolated rain showers there as well. As we look out way to the west, we can see our next system coming up from the south, bringing in some rain to the western Aleutian Islands and a lot of southerly flow behind that warm front, a lot of warm air behind that front as well. Moving into tonight, we can see that southerly fetch behind this system, bringing in more rain up to parts of the northern Bering Sea and extending out over the western Seward Peninsula and the Yukon Delta. Behind the front, we do have some rain with another trough pushing in through the central and eastern Aleutian Islands, and then way out west, the cold front bringing in some rain to the western Aleutians. Looking out at the impacts of our high pressure as it is building in over the state, going to see a lot of fog developing in the eastern Bering, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay area, Kuskokwim Delta area, extending out east towards the Cook Inlet area and the Copper River Basin, all expected to see some fog forming overnight due to this high pressure clearing out a lot of the cloud cover. Then we are going to have lingering showers as that trough has broken off and started to diminish, but there are still going to be some showers in eastern parts of the interior, starting off as rain, transitioning over to snow as things cool down, and then primarily snow along the eastern parts of the Arctic coastline overnight. Our other low pushing further off to the south and east, leaving the panhandle void of precipitation overnight. For Thursday, going to continue to see the high pressure dominating the panhandle area, so we aren't going to see any new rain there. High pressure moving even further into the interior part of the state here on Thursday, but we will still see some isolated rain and snow showers, primarily snow in the morning, becoming more rain in the afternoon in the far, far eastern parts of the interior. And then up along the Arctic coastline, similarly, we'll see some snow along the very eastern parts of the Arctic coastline. That's going to transition to rain as we get into the afternoon hours. However, it's also going to push off to the east as we move into the afternoon hours. Then our main system pushing up from the south, bringing in a lot of southerly flow, a lot of warm air and moisture to areas all along the Gulf coastline, or not Gulf coastline, but the west coast of the state, up towards the Barrow area, bringing rain to those areas, into the Kotzebue Sound area, down into the Yukon Delta area for St. Lawrence Island, as well as the Pribilof Islands. A little bit lighter as we get further to the south, and then into the Aleutians, Bering Sea. We're going to see a lot of rain there from this system as well. And Thursday morning, going to see some fog lingering along the Bristol Bay area and Kuskokwim Delta coastline. Then we can see the next system coming up from the south behind this. But what's important to note here is we can start to see a tighter gradient here with those isobars, and that's going to cause some stronger winds throughout much of the Bering Sea, starting to pick up there on Thursday. So we will see some stronger winds along the west coast throughout much of the Bering Sea, and especially along the central Aleutians through the Alaska Peninsula. On Thursday, kind of a similar setup for those winds, as we see a lot of tight packing there to bring in some stronger winds eastern Bering along the west coast of the state. That's going to be accompanied by rain as that next system has come up from the south, bringing an even stronger fetch of warm, moist air. So central Aleutian Islands to the Alaska Peninsula, going to see a lot of rain, going to see some stronger winds, especially in these eastern portions here on Friday, and going to see rain extending up the coastline all the way towards the Point Hope area. As we move further inland in the Bristol Bay area, we are going to see some morning fog there on Friday morning. As we look out over the remainder of the state, high pressure is pushing off over Canada now, but still its influence impacts much of mainland Alaska, leading to lack of precipitation along the Arctic coastline, interior Alaska, and the south central. And a new low coming in from the north here, going to start to bring in some rain close to the panhandle, but most of the panhandle should remain out of the rain for Friday. For temperatures in the 50s throughout much of the panhandle, coldest there up by Skagway area, 50 degrees. As we look out over the south central, we do have temperatures in the upper 40s to mid 50s, warmest along the Gulf Coast, and coldest there as we get closer towards Talkeetna, 34 degrees this afternoon for them, and then upper 30s to lower 40s throughout the interior. Coldest as we move further to the north towards Arctic Village, 25 degrees this afternoon. And then in the mid 30s to lower 40s along the Arctic coastline. On the west coast of the state, in the 40s for the most part. Similarly down in the Norton Sound area, mid to upper 40s there. Some places getting a little bit closer to 50 as we get further to the south, as we can see in southwest Alaska. Lower 50s in the YK Delta area, mid 50s in the Bristol Bay area, continuing down to the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands this afternoon, and mid 50s for the central Aleutians, Pribilofs and western Aleutians, a little bit colder there, 50, 51 degrees. As we go for lows tonight, going to drop into the upper 40s throughout the Bering Sea area, Aleutian Islands, down into the lower 40s for the Bristol Bay area and YK Delta area, as well as the Seward Peninsula area. As we get up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down to right around freezing. And as we move into the interior, should be in the mid 30s there. Lower 30s as we get down into the south central area. Kodiak staying a little bit warmer, 43 degrees expected low. And then in the panhandle, mid 30s to lower 40s for lows. Highs for tomorrow, mid 50s in the panhandle, lower 50s as we get into the south central. mid-40s in the interior, coldest as we get further off to the east, and right around 40 degrees for the Arctic coastline. As we move and look at the west coast of the state, Kotzebue Sound area in the 40s there, upper 40s for highs tomorrow for the Norton Sound area, mid-50s for much of the YK Delta and Bristol Bay areas, and then lower to mid-50s as we move out over the Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and Pribilofs. Switching gears now to flying weather. Much of our MVFR and IFR conditions are out over the Bering Sea with those systems coming up from the south. Much of the IFR is out over the central and western Aleutian Islands, and this is going to start to spread further to the north as that system continues to push further to the north and east, and that's going to now extend out over the central Aleutian Islands towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, with that leading edge front starting to bring in some MVFR conditions along the Point Hope area. For our passes, with all the high pressure over the state, it's not a surprise we're going to see a lot of VFR conditions, and AKwx should be VFR for tomorrow, as well as Adigan, Lake Clark, and Merrill. VFR conditions expected for Rainy, Windy, and Isabel passes. Mentasta Pass should also be VFR tomorrow. Tanita Pass, VFR expected, as well as Portage and Chilkoot and White. All going to be VFR for the passes tomorrow. For our freezing levels, looking at tomorrow morning, we are going to see a lot of those cold areas. If you can see the surface freezing line extending out through much of the south central, dropping us down right around freezing in the south central, and then also along the Arctic coastline, dropping around or below freezing up there, including the Brooks Range. And then as we look out west, we have a lot of warmer air coming up from the south, so we're seeing a lot of the higher freezing levels out over the Alaska Peninsula and headed towards the Aleutian Islands. For our icing tomorrow, just up to the north, a little bit too warm as we look further to the south, so we're focusing in on areas around the Seward Peninsula, up towards Point Hope and down towards Gamble there, above 10,000 feet. Through the central parts of the Brooks Range, up towards Barrow area, above 12,000 feet expected there. For our jet stream tomorrow, main part of the jet, 130 knots, but it is curving back up to the north, starting to push those systems up towards our area from the North Pacific, but only around 60 knots there. Helping to push our first system is the 105 knot jet out over the western Bering that comes back out of a northwesterly direction over mainland Alaska at 100 knots and drops down into the North Pacific around 80 knots there. 9,000 feet winds. We do have movement around our ridge. Lowest by the ridge, 20 to 25 knots, but getting higher and out of a westerly direction as we get further to the north in the state. And then by the Brooks Range, highest over mainland Alaska, around 50 knots out of a westerly direction. Pretty light over the Panhandle, 10 to 20 knots there. And then southerly flow out over the Bering Sea. Strongest here by the Aleutians is out over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands at 35 knots. And then out over the northwestern part of the Bering Sea is high as 60 knots there. Down to 3,000 feet, we can see the same southerly flow pattern. Strongest again by the Aleutians for the central and eastern Aleutians, 40 to 45 knots. Overall, strongest for the Bering Sea, northwestern Bering, 60 knots there out of that southerly, southwesterly direction. Curving around our ridging, lowest again by the ridge, 15 to 20 knots there, but picking up to 30 to 35 as we get over the northern parts of the state. Then out over the Panhandle, westerly flow around 15 knots there. For our turbulence, all located primarily with those stronger winds. So we're seeing those winds that were coming over the central and eastern Aleutian Islands below 4,000 feet. And as we move throughout the day, those winds are going to extend and bring more turbulence out over the Alaska Peninsula as well. Out over the Pribilof Islands below 4,000 feet there. And then up from the YK Delta area up the west coast towards the Point Hope area, including areas in the western Seward Peninsula like Tin City, and then down over the Seward Peninsula or St. Lawrence Island at below 5,000 feet. And if you hang with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Everybody has observed flooding at some time, either firsthand or in the media. More people lose their lives in floods than in any other weather-related event. Related flood damages exceed $3 billion each year. The Great Flood of 1993 caused over $15 billion in damages across the upper Midwest. Similar floods from excessive rainfall associated with tropical storms or hurricanes attract much media attention and contain few surprises. These floods occur over days and weeks, while short-duration, intense rainfall events produce flash floods. Flash floods can roll boulders the size of cars, tear out trees, destroy buildings and bridges, and pose a significant threat to human lives. Flash floods can occur in what is normally a dry creek bed. A hidden danger awaits motorists where a road without a bridge dips across a creek bed. This is called a low water crossing. Low water crossings represent a hidden danger because flooding occurs in an area that people normally and frequently pass through. Few people appreciate the power of running water. Even fewer realize how fast water can rise in a small stream and flood a highway, creating a dangerous situation. A similar dangerous situation occurs for motorists who drive through low drainage areas flooded by standing water. Floods and flash floods are costly to human life and property. Nearly half of the flood-related deaths that occur each year are vehicle-related, and damages to vehicles can easily exceed $1 million. Although many of the highway dips that become low-water crossings are identified as potential flood areas, people do not understand the hidden dangers, and lives are needlessly lost. Dr. Susan Zevin, Deputy Assistant Administrator for Operations at the National Weather Service, will discuss why low-water crossings can be so dangerous to motorists.
Well, water weighs 62.4 pounds per cubic foot. What does that mean? That's the equivalent of 2 cinder blocks that can hit you in your knees going at 10 miles an hour. When a vehicle stalls in the water's momentum is transferred to the car. So for each foot that the water rises, 500 pounds of force on the side are applied to the car. Buoyancy is the biggest factor. For each foot of water that the water rises, it displaces 1,500 pounds that your car weighs, so that your car will weigh 1,500 pounds less than it did before. You can lose control of your car in 2 feet of water. And in smaller cars, you can lose control of the car in 6 inches of water.
Why do so many people needlessly lose their lives in flooding at road dips and low water crossings? People have extreme confidence in the size and weight of their vehicle. Many people interviewed, such as Charles Lovett, expressed surprise at the force of the water.
I tried to charge through the water, and I got about right here when the truck just stopped dead, and I panicked a little bit here, and it started to move a couple of inches, a couple of feet. As we moved down into the stream here, and we started to get carried away, it wasn't a floating sensation, it was as if we were completely out of control.
The difference in many cases is inches. Those people who have at various times repeatedly driven through a flooded low water crossing do not recognize the danger of a small increase in the water level. The second misconception is the past history involved in driving through a low water crossing.
I thought it wasn't deep, but I guess it got deep.
Sign said don't go through here when it's flooded.
Oh, I know, but I went through here before, and it was not even deep at all.
The third misconception is the idea that driving fast through a low water crossing will enable the driver to arrive safely on the other side. It's simply not true. The faster a driver attempts to cross a road covered with water, the less contact he has with the road. Once the vehicle begins to hydroplane, it begins to float, and control of the vehicle is lost. Making the situation worse, more than half of all low water crossing vehicular-related deaths take place at night when visibility is limited. Under these conditions, the vulnerability of the driver and passengers to the hidden danger is greatly magnified. The existence of low water crossings is very prevalent throughout the United States, especially in the Southwest, where many low water crossings exist. There are things you can do to reduce the risk of becoming a low water crossing fatality.
Heed all flood and flash flood warnings issued by the National Weather Service. Do not drive around barricades at low water crossings. Be especially vigilant at night or when traveling on unfamiliar roads. Do not cross flowing water. Observe rising water indicators at low water crossings. Remember, as little as 6 inches of water may cause you to lose control of your car. Be aware that roadbeds may be washed away under the floodwaters. If you choose to abandon your vehicle, respect the force of the water. Remember, just 6 inches of fast-moving water will knock you off your feet.
Floods and flash floods will continue to occur. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and its National Weather Service, has the mission to provide river and flood forecasts and warnings to the nation. But the warnings are only effective if the people know and understand the dangers of floods. Rising waters over roadways pose a threat to life, save lives and property. Don't take chances with hidden dangers at low water crossings.
Welcome back. We'll start off with a quick look at our ice edge. We do have some ice right around the Barrow area that we have seen some reports from that is visible from shoreline. However, we have over the next couple days, Thursday and Friday, southwesterly winds around 20 knots that are going to help push some of that off to the north and east. And then on Saturday, we are going to see that switch to a southeasterly flow, pushing things off more towards the north and west. However, some of the landlocked ice doesn't mean that's all going to get pushed away, but we are going to see a lot of that start to drift away from the shoreline. Taking a look now at our marine forecast, starting off in the southeast, we're going to see some northerly winds, 20 to 25 knots for the most part. Up towards the Yakutat area, we are going to see some gusts out of the bays and passes up there, around 6 feet for seas out over the Gulf side. Then on Friday, things are going to pick up a little bit, 25 to 30 knots for the most part. We are going to see a lot of gustier conditions throughout much of the Panhandle area, anywhere from central parts of the Panhandle all the way up through that Yakutat area. Some of the more southern locations around Metlakatla and Ketchikan should be a little bit calmer for those gusty winds. Seas going to pick up in the Gulf as well, 8 to 10 feet for the most part. For Thursday in the south central, we are going to have some lighter winds, 10 to 15 knots with kind of an outflow direction with that northerly northwesterly flow. A little bit stronger east of the Barren Islands there, around 20 knots. Seas anywhere from 2 to 4 feet, pretty light on Thursday. And then on Friday, things are going to get even lighter. Variable winds for the most part in the north, around 10 knots, and then a east or southeast flow of around 15 knots as we get closer towards Kodiak Island. For the Alaska Peninsula, primarily a southeasterly flow, strongest as we get further to the west, around 30 knots, but dropping off to around 15 knots as we get further to the east. And as we approach Kodiak Island, switching to southwesterly flow there, around 15 knots. Seas highest on the Pacific side up to as high as 11 feet, further off to the west. For Friday, all flow is going to be out of that southeasterly direction, getting even stronger, 30 to 35 in eastern portions, but up to as high as 50 knots. Storm force winds there with seas as high as 21 feet as we get towards the Shumigan Islands area. For the Aleutian Islands, primarily southeasterly flow, 30 to 35 knots, but as we get further off towards the west, things dropping off to 10 knots and then becoming westerly as we get closer towards the western Aleutian Islands, around 20 knots there on Thursday. For Friday, things becoming northwesterly by the western Aleutians, 30 to 40 knots, seas 9 to 14 feet. Still southeasterly way out to the east, and that's going to be around 35 to 40 knots. Highest seas on the Pacific side, 14 to 18 feet. As we look along the west coast of the state, primarily a southerly direction, 25 to 35 knots, and that's going to be strongest out to the west. and with seas highest out to the west as well, 14 to 15 feet out there. For Friday, southeasterly flow anywhere from 30 knots to 45 knots, strongest here south of Nunavik Island in the eastern parts of the Bering Sea. And then we're going to have seas anywhere from 11 to 14 feet. Along the Arctic coastline, we are going to have flow coming out of a southerly direction around 30 knots, becoming westerly as we get into the eastern parts of the Arctic coastline up to as high as 30 knots there. Seas around 6 to 8 feet. Then on Friday, flow becoming southwesterly for those eastern portions around 20 knots, and southerly flow out over the Point Hope area around 30 knots there, with seas anywhere from 7 to 9 feet. Quick review for the state. Tonight we do have a system out west over the Bering Sea bringing them a lot of wind and a lot of rain to the area extending down to the Aleutian Islands. High pressure moving in over the southern part of the state, allowing fog to develop in much of southwest Alaska, eastern parts of the Bering, Alaska Peninsula, and areas around the south central Lake, Cook Inlet, and the Copper River Basin. But with this southwesterly flow pushing up towards the Seward Peninsula area, we do have some high surf advisories out. That's for the northern and eastern parts of Norton Sound and the western part of Kotzebue Sound. All those coastlines, high surf advisory in effect until 4 a.m. tomorrow morning on Thursday. For the eastern parts of the state, we are going to have some lingering showers, becoming more snow in the eastern parts of the interior. Along the Arctic coastline should become all snow. And then down around the Panhandle area, we are going to see high pressure building in, keeping a lot of the rain further to the south and helping to push off this low further to the south and east. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. I want to thank you for being here with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.